Trump keeps telling us the quiet part out loud. The breakdown starts now. Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Tara Setmayer. The Rick Wilson is traveling this week. And as you can see, I am not home. I'm in New York City. Why? I'm guest hosting The View. So some of you may have seen me today. Today was day one. I'll be on tomorrow and Thursday if you missed today. So it's a little exciting. I get to be in New York City. It's the greatest city in the world. It's lovely here. So thus the different background. But we have a great show for you tonight. I am so thrilled because I adore this couple and you guys know them as well. Alexander and Rachel Vindman. Do those names sound familiar? Probably, because Alexander Vindman, the retired lieutenant colonel, was one of the heroes, in my opinion, of the first impeachment of Donald Trump, where he spoke out so eloquently and about his experience with Trump and Ukraine. And he said one of the most poignant lines that has stuck with me since then, discussing his father's reaction to his testimony, where he said, "Here, right still matters." So he wrote a book called that too. So Alexander is with us and his lovely wife, Rachel, is also joining us. They're doing a joint interview because I thought it was important to bring them together because Rachel has a lot to say too. She's smart, she's feisty, and I like her. So stay tuned for the Vindmans. They'll be up in just a couple of minutes. But first, it's Tuesday. So that means before we get to headlines, it's time for Last Week in the Republican Party. Take a look.
"45th President of the United States."
45th and 47th.
47th. Yes.
We've now seen the incompetence. We all got a taste of what America could be. 4 years of Trump.
Stupid son of a bitch. Donald Trump was the first president to take on and fight and combat the Chinese Communist Party. So they manufactured a bioweapon to export to the United States to try to bring down our economy.
No one perhaps has done more to confuse people and maybe dissuade them from having the vaccine than probably our Vice President, Kamala Harris.
This president, this vice president, his entire cabinet, if this were the good old days, we'd have a military tribunal.
If I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons.
Most people would agree that we don't come from monkeys and that we didn't Big Bang, right? So if you can find common ground with people, then you can start building a foundation of like what truth is, So.
And let's go, Brandon.
Absolutely normal.
I think this is kind of comedy gold, don't you? This whole Green New Deal and saying climate change and global warming and all of that, that's been going on long enough now that they should have some data to back up their decisions.
I just want to say thank God for Joe Biden. She is an embarrassment to the state of Georgia.
This midterm election in the following 2024, it's no longer about Republicans and Democrats. It's a race between patriots and traitors.
Good grief. Every week we highlight some of the crazy that's going on, and it's really partially to make fun of it, but also because people need to see what's happening. This is what's going on. And, of course, I get a lot of fan mail, but I also get hate mail when I do The View. And today, some, Trumper sent me a nasty tweet asking me, how dare I consider myself a conservative? What are my conservative bona fides, basically? What do you believe in that's conservative? And, how could you be a Republican? And I'm not a Republican anymore because the Republican Party doesn't exist, the one that I joined. And I look at this and I'm like, that is the Republican Party. What we just showed you, that is what the Republicans have become. So no, I'm not a Republican. Am I a conservative? I am. That is a political ideology. That is not that. So not what that crazy that we just saw. And these people, they think the qualification now to be a conservative is to be a Trump cult member. I'm not that. That shit right there is insane. And until Republicans have a policy platform, which they haven't had in 5 or 6 years now, this is what they are. So good grief. And what was going on with Kellyanne? Anywho, some of the quick headlines before I bring the Vindmans in. I don't know if you guys saw Trump at the rally over the weekend. I personally did not watch it because I can't suffer through that on Saturday nights anymore. But I saw the highlights after the fact. And this idea of him telling people that the prosecutors who are prosecuting his cases in Georgia and New York are racists. We know why he said that. Yes, they are all Black. He's not happy about that. Projecting his racism, of course, but very dangerous stuff. Telling his people, activating them again, telling them to go out there and protest in the streets if he's convicted. And, these racist, this is dangerous, dangerous rhetoric. And he's doing it purposely. This is with purpose. He's not randomly saying words. He knows what he's doing when he says this. He's activating these people. Just like the stand back and stand by, right, with the Proud Boys. He is signaling to his deplorables that let's do another January 6th. He saw what happened with that. Why not rally the troops again? We've got to keep an eye on this. And frankly, Republicans, elected Republicans who claim that they're not the party of Trump, right? Then they need to condemn it. Condemn it wholeheartedly. This guy is putting people in harm's way. The prosecutor in Atlanta that's pursuing the Trump election fraud case had to call the FBI and ask for protection for the courthouse and for the members of her team. What are we doing? This is 2022. This guy is freaking terrorizing people because he knows that he's in big shit trouble. Well, speaking of that, the New York Times, big headline last night, kind of what we already knew, but just more confirmation with the reporting. We already knew that Trump was trying to overturn the election. He basically admitted it over the weekend in his statement about Pence, right? Pence had the ability to overturn the election. So I guess that is an acknowledgement that he lost it. Very strange. But then we now heard, a couple of weeks ago, we heard about the Defense Department and this executive order to have the Defense Department seize voting machines. That was one of the schemes that was cooked up. Well, now we know that Trump and his minions were talking to DHS, Department of Homeland Security, about them possibly seizing voting machines under some obscure laws that they think applied here. This is craziness. And again, dangerous. This is not what happens in a democracy. And it's the closest link we've seen, direct link to Trump's involvement in all this. And Giuliani and all the rest of the cacophony of kookery that I talk about, or that Rick talks about, they were all involved in this too. But even Giuliani recognized that the seizing of voting machines thing was probably a bridge too far. So that goes to show you that with Giuliani, for God's sakes. But this is all just closing in and furthering what we already know is what their intent was, that this was a multi-pronged conspiracy, very well thought out, very well coordinated, terribly executed, obviously. And thank God that there were the guardrails in place that prevented this scheme from going through, because it would have thrown us into a constitutional crisis, and God knows where we would have been, worse than January 6th. So we're going to keep paying attention to this. The January 6th committee is chugging along, and they're doing great work, and I'm happy to see that. But there's also other things going on, too, in the world. Besides everything that's happening domestically, we have what's going on in Ukraine. We have talked a lot about foreign policy here in the breakdown because there's just so much shit happening domestically. But what's happening in Ukraine is actually really important, and it's part of a greater theme that we talk about often here concerning the threat to Western-style democracy. So with that, I want to bring in tonight's guests. We have Alexander and Rachel Vindman. They really need no introduction, but I will properly introduce them anyway for those who don't know y'all. Alexander is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel who was the director of the European director for European Affairs for the National Security Council. Like I said earlier, his testimony before Congress provided evidence that resulted in Trump's first impeachment. And then his lovely wife, Rachel, she's arguably more outspoken than Alex. She is a beast on Twitter. If you don't follow her, follow her. And she's also the co-host of a really cool podcast called Suburban Women Problem. Welcome, you guys.
Thanks for having us, Tara. It's great to see you.
Howdy.
I'm so happy to have you guys together because oftentimes we see Alex and occasionally we've seen Rachel, not as much, but I'm glad to see more of you. But I thought it was important to bring you guys on together just because this week here at LP, we're really focusing in on the importance of democracy and patriotism and the assault on both. And you guys embody all of that's good in this country. So that's why I wanted to have you on together. Alex, I want to start with you since Ukraine is in the news. And, when I worked in Congress, the member of Congress I worked for was on the wrong side of the Russia issue, admittedly, and I never agreed with him on it. But it did, I did become a lot more learned on that region of the world and what's going on. So I take great interest when we see what Putin is doing, what's happening in Ukraine. Can you just talk a little bit about the significance of this? And are we really looking at possibly getting into some type of kinetic war with Russia?
Yes. First, thanks, Tara, for having me on. I appreciated the catch up or the wrap up that you did for the last week with the Republicans. I've been unplugged from domestic policy, so it's kind of scary. That catch up was not good. But I've been basically what I've been focusing on is on Russia getting ready to conduct a major offensive against Ukraine. This will probably look a lot like World War II planes, artillery, bombs dropping everywhere. That's what this is shaping up to look like on the borders of Russia and Ukraine. And it's not going to be limited. It's probably going to be an attack on the major cities in Ukraine. And it's not all that dissimilar to what you mentioned earlier, which is a resurgent or surging authoritarianism that's looking to make gains against democracy. Ukraine is a democracy. It's not going to be limited. It's going to be an intent to crush Ukrainian democracy, crush the Ukrainian population. And there's a good chance that this might spin out of control also, which is why I've been talking about being a lot more assertive and aggressive in supporting the Ukrainians. What you have is a situation in which the Russians are going to launch tens of thousands of troops against Ukraine, and our allies that we have obligations to in NATO have said that they're going to help. They're providing weapons to Ukraine. They're going to continue to try to train Ukrainians on advanced capabilities. And there already you have the outlines of a broader conflict and something that the U.S. might not be able to keep clear of, especially if cyber attacks spill over. So that's why this is something to pay attention to. And I'm happy to share what I know with your viewers.
That is a really dire picture, Alex, and probably the most straightforward depiction of what's potentially going to happen that I've heard yet. It seems that a lot of my foreign affairs friends have kind of been beating around the bush a little bit like, well, yeah, it doesn't look good. But you really just went for it, that we're potentially looking at something which I would think we haven't seen in generations at this level in Europe.
Absolutely.
So Americans look at the situation and they go, all right, that's over there. Like some weird guy that was a comedian is like the president, and Trump got impeached talking to him. And why do we give a shit what's going on here in the US? How does that impact the United States? I know the answer, but you're much more articulate on this than I am. But why should Americans care? How does this affect them?
Of course. So I think we should take a look at, American values and recognize that American values are at stake here. America's credibility as the leader of the democratic world, but American values, freedom, democracy, free and fair elections, even though that we've had recent issues under the last administration under Trump. And then we have self-determination, but then we also have the interest side of the equation. This is what I'm talking about, that our biggest, most important partnership is with Europe. They're an enormous trading partner for us. They're the bedrock of our alliance structure. They're going to be a linchpin in our ability to push back against China as a rising power. And this is occurring on their doorstep. They're the ones that are going to be absorbing tens of thousands of refugees. It's going to be a changed security environment, something that we haven't, again, experienced since World War II. And it's just not something that we could cleanly stay out of. We've been sucked into 2 wars in Europe in the 20th century, and we need to be doing more in order to avoid this becoming a major military offensive and avoid, the chance of being sucked into another war in Europe.
Oh boy. Well, your involvement in Ukraine, you were born there and you left there to come to the United States. You have an amazing story. I encourage everyone to read your book, Here Right Matters, because it's really, really good. And your background and expertise on this comes from a really unique place. So, and plus you tell really great stories about you and your twin brother. And as everyone knows, my husband is a triplet. So there's 3 of him and he has an identical twin, and they used to get into all kinds of mischief too. So great stories about that. But Rachel, you and Alex became household names, probably not the way you intended, because Alex was brave enough to speak up when he saw wrongdoing and do his patriotic duty and adhere to his oath, and spoke out against Trump's transgressions with Ukraine. And I just, people don't oftentimes get a chance to hear from you what that was like for you and your family at the time when Alex first testified. What was that like for you guys?
It was terrifying. There was just so much uncertainty, in addition to the physical risk of just, come on, you played the video of the people. Every week when I see what's happening in the Republican Party, it's terrifying. And you put a bit of a humorous spin on it, but there's not a lot of humor at 3 a.m. when you're reading the vitriol on Twitter. And because he was an active duty officer, we couldn't speak out publicly. So only through attorneys, and, had to be very careful. So it was really scary. But, since then, since he's retired, through, unfortunate circumstances, I would say, but I think we've made the best of it in that this is never where we plan to be, but I think many people watching probably their life has taken many twists and turns they didn't expect. But this is the fight that, we're in now. What is the Army saying? Take the fight to the enemy. Well, I think the fight came to us in a lot of ways, but we didn't shy away from it. And I think the fight is actually coming to every American, every democracy-loving American. And when the fight comes to us, which it is now, we just have to do everything in our power to make a difference and to stand up and fight for democracy and to save it. Because as you showed us, there's so many who have no interest in democracy and the hallmarks of our country, the foundation of our country.
You talked about this a couple weeks ago on PBS, and you were particularly about when you knew Alex's Army career was over.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that moment.
Well, I knew before he did, because now I don't want to tyranny for anyone, but he is a real optimist. So I know he just gave you a no holds barred depiction of Ukraine, and now I'm telling you he's an optimist. So everyone's probably really yeah. But by the way, I've been living with this since like October, November, these assessments. And so I'm a little bit, I've gotten used to it, but he's been talking about it for a long time. But it took him, I think, just a while to realize that the Army wasn't going to protect him, that the Army was not going to take care of him. And, maybe that's because they had to protect the institution. But at some point, I see the criticism and hear the criticism of DOJ. And I know DOJ has their defenders, and I I applaud those people. I mean, I think, both sides have some real, both sides in the good camp, I would say, have their positions. But if we don't protect democracy, there's nothing to save. So the institution doesn't matter if we can't harden it. And there are no saviors. We can't just keep expecting heroes, because that's unrealistic. What we have to do is harden democracy and make it, and just say nothing matters but democracy. So everyone, no matter if you're conservative or progressive, we have to come together on this one issue, and then we can get back to debating the tax code.
I'm with you, sister. I say that all the time, that I wish we could have a debate on policy again. But right now, it's a binary choice in this country between defending our democracy and stopping this march toward authoritarianism that we seem to see happening with the Republican Party every day. It's shocking. Alex, I mean, speaking of shocking, from your perspective and given your area of expertise here, what do you think about when you see Tucker Carlson basically auditioning to be Vladimir Putin's freaking spokesperson every night on Fox News?
It's interesting that if it was just something that was playing on domestic U.S. domestic networks, that'd be troubling. It would undermine bipartisan support for Ukraine, but it's not. Tucker Carlson is constantly on Russian state news media. Him and his ilk are on there talking about a support to Russia versus Ukraine. So this is actually feeding
and questioning NATO.
This is actually feeding the beast. It's feeding the appetite for Vladimir Putin to conduct this operation against Ukraine that, again, is not going to be limited to Ukraine. It's going to affect U.S. interests. So he is, in fact, harming U.S. interests. He is complicit with the enemies and adversaries of the United States to harm U.S. interests.
If you had to say, one thing to Donald Trump, he was standing in front of you, no consequences, what would you say to him? Alex first, then Rachel.
You're your own worst enemy. Keep it up.
Rachel, what would you say?
Just go away. Just leave us alone, please. We're full up on crazy, and we don't need any more. But he's gotten what he wanted, and it's time to just go away and leave us alone, and we can rebuild and pick up the pieces. But as long as he's around, that's never going to happen. So I'm sure he wouldn't listen to me, but that's what I would say. Go away.
I think you speak for 80 plus million people who voted him out of office. We all wish he would just go the fuck away and leave us all alone and let us have our democracy back, and so we can argue over the tax code again. Yep. But in the last minute or so that we have with you, I have to get this in because not only am I a huge fan of the two of you, but I'm a huge fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm. So when I saw Alex in the season finale this year, I went, stop it. This is great. Alex, what was it like for you working with Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm? That feels like a dream come true for me, at least. What was it like?
It was a great deal of fun. I think he was a little bit upset about being upstaged by a funnier character. But, it was really quite fun. The cast was lovely. I think everything came together pretty nicely. I'm glad I did it. I almost, I initially declined, but kind of all came together, and it was a good experience.
And he didn't leave me.
I think I nailed the character too. I think I nailed the character.
Yeah, I think so. I think that however you performed in the audition, it worked. How did it come about?
I think they reached out through my book agent, and I said no, and they persisted. And then
you had a phone call with Larry David.
Then I had a phone call. He kind of laid out what he wanted to do, and kind of schmoozed me. And we also want to go out there and see a new baby. Rachel's brother had a child, so we want to go see her. So it kind of all came together.
That's amazing.
I had a Zoom call with Larry David, the Larry David. I was like,
right.
Yeah.
That must have been pretty fun. I can't imagine being courted by Larry David. It feels like that could have been an episode in and of itself. They should have had that in the outtakes. That's awesome. Well, I'm really happy for you guys, and I wish you so much success and pray for protection for you and your family. And I know I speak for millions of people that we're so appreciative that you decided to stand up and do the right thing, and do something that the majority of the Republican Party does not have the courage to do. And we appreciate you for it. You guys are a dynamic duo, and we love it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tara.
Keep up the good work. And I can't with these bad reports about Ukraine. It's honest at least.
Yeah, no hedging.
I know. Gosh. Take care.
Bye.
Aren't they great? They're so cute together, and I love it. I love to see power couples, especially patriotic power couples. Shout out to the Vindmans. All right, guys, so that's our show for tonight, and I'm going to leave you with Lincoln Project's latest ad. It is about voting rights. It's called Vote While It Counts. We'll see you next week.
It doesn't happen like we think it does. No one rolls the tanks. No armies meet in pitched battle. It happens quietly, little by little. And because so many think it can't happen, it does happen. Little by little, the rules change. It doesn't seem shocking or sudden. And that's the point. Fewer places to vote, longer lines. Don't worry, they say. We're just improving the system. They hope we won't notice the rules are changing because they lost the last election. They hope we just won't care enough to stop them. They believe they can take America away from us, and we won't even notice. We know who they are. We know what they want. The question is, who are we? Do we let them get away with it, or do we fight? Democracy is on the ballot. Vote while your vote still counts. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this